What's going on, guys? This is Nick here with Gearhead Garage, and today is a very good day. We are in the shop with my car, and we're going to be solving what is, in my opinion, one of the largest problems with the Mark III Supra, the underpowered brakes. Now, from the factory, these things weighed 3,600 pounds, and they were fitted with single piston front calipers. And that's just not going to cut it, especially when you're talking about a road racing application where you need to do a lot of repeated high-speed stops. Now, there are a lot of other solutions out there for the Mark III and front brakes. There's a Brembo kit right now that's being widely developed and utilized on these cars. But today, we're going to be installing a kit that I have had my eyes on for so many years. So we've partnered with ARZ Performance, and we're going to be installing the front 4-piston Wilwood brake kit on my Mark III Supra. When you buy his kit, he ships everything you need to make this thing work. All the fasteners, the bracket, the caliper, the brake pads, the rotors that fit on our hubs. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna walk you through what you need to do to make this installation as easy as possible. Okay, first things first, I know it's tedious, but you'll wanna do a complete flush of the entire brake system. This way you get all of the old fluid and debris out of your old calipers before you put your new Wilwood components in. Now the first step is popping the cap off of the reservoir and pulling out the screen on the inside. Take your turkey baster and pull out as much fluid as you can. Look at all of that debris that was just sitting in the bottom of the reservoir with brand new, fresh fluid. Now, I just recently flushed my entire system about 1,000 miles before I did this upgrade, and I did not use the turkey baster method when I did it the first time, and now I see what is so important. Once you've extracted all of the fluid, you can take a lint-free cloth and wipe down the inside of the reservoir to make sure you get any debris that's hanging behind. Next, pour your choice of DOT3 fluid into your brake reservoir and fill it to the max line before you start your flush. With a full reservoir, you'll want to start at the brake caliper that's furthest from the reservoir. Now, typically on left-hand drive vehicles, this will be the rear passenger side caliper. Once you loosen your lug nuts, jack the vehicle up and secure a jack stand underneath to remove the wheel. Use some hose, preferably clear hose, with an inner diameter of 3/16, which should fit snugly over your bleeder valve. Push the hose onto the bleeder valve so that when you break the bleeder valve loose, any fluid will go directly into a bucket or a makeshift reservoir. Now, this is typically a 2-person job, so have one person sitting in the driver's seat to pump the brakes 4 to 5 times and then hold, and then have the person by the brake caliper release the bleeder valve. This will allow fluid to flow through the system and to the caliper that you're working on. Keep repeating this process until you see clear fluid coming out. Now, don't forget to keep an eye on the brake master cylinder reservoir throughout this process to make sure that it never runs dry. Now it's time to open the box. Now, Andy packages these kits very safely and intuitively. First, you'll find the Wilwood BP10 brake pads snugly on the outside of the 2 Wilwood boxes. One box will contain the passenger side components, and the other box will contain the driver's side components. Inside each box, you'll find the bracket you'll need with the fasteners already installed in the order they will be used on your knuckle, so be sure to keep this all intact until you're ready to install it. I've got to say, I got a huge kick out of this bracket. I am a sucker for the little details like the Mark III and the orientation etched into the aluminum. Next, you'll see the 4-piston Wilwood caliper with a piece of bubble wrap on the inside. These will be a hell of an upgrade from the factory single piston setup. Next, you'll find the brand new brake lines with new retainers. Finally, you'll find the 13-inch Wilwood Spec 37 rotors, which come in a black finish that Wilwood does specifically for this ARZ kit. These rotors will fit on the factory Mark III hubs without the use of hub-centric rings. Before you start disassembly, you'll want to take pictures of how the brake lines are routed. Trust me, you will start to second-guess yourself when you're going to reassemble everything. Now on to the installation. You'll want to break loose the soft line where it connects to the hard line right at the body. You'll also want to take note of how the brake line is secured using the C-clip and the rectangular bracket when you go to install your new lines. Now we'll remove the factory caliper with the 2 bolts on the back side of the knuckle. If the bolts seem to be rusty or they're giving you a hard time loosening up, use some penetrating oil. However, be sure that the bolt head is completely dry before you try to loosen it again. Believe it or not, sometimes the lubrication on the head of the bolt can make the difference between stripping the bolt head and having a successful removal. Once the caliper is out of the way, you can remove the rotor. Next up, we make way for the new Wilwood rotor, which means removal of the factory brake dust shield. Now, I have an ABS-equipped car, and the recommended method involves aviation tin snips and lots of forearm work. If you do not have ABS, you can trim back the sections of the dust shield to gain access to the fasteners that hold the shield to the knuckle so you can remove it entirely. Now back to the ABS-equipped removal. Once you finish trimming the outside of the shield, use a file or a Dremel to smooth out the edges and prime and paint as you see fit. Now we have some cleaning to do. First, get yourself some eye protection and use a wire brush on a drill or any reasonable means necessary to clean the hub surface where the rotor hat will mount to and the mounting tabs that you removed the factory Toyota caliper from. This step ensures that you'll get a clean mating surface between the rotor and the hub free from rust. You can also use a wire brush on a die grinder. Now, I used my father's 50-year-old Craftsman drill with a wire wheel and then finished up with a Dremel with a smaller wire wheel. While this method worked fine and it was super cool to use my dad's drill, if I were to do this installation over again, I would have borrowed a die grinder just so I could expedite the process a little bit more. Next up, we're going to clearance the small portion on the knuckle to make way for the top mounting bolt for your new caliper. This is precisely where you'll want to remove some material. We do this to make sure that the fastener we have coming from inboard to outboard has plenty of room. But the amount of material needed to remove on this installation is so minimal, I highly recommend test fitting your new nifty bracket as much as possible to make sure that you only remove what is absolutely necessary. For this job, I also used my father's Craftsman drill with a small Dremel bit, and it did just fine. It took a touch more time, but it allowed me to be very precise. Now we're going to install the bracket. Remember, keep the fasteners on the bracket so you know exactly how they'll be utilized during this part of the installation. And once you're done admiring how neat this bracket is, you can check on the clearance for that top caliper fastener. As you can see, we have plenty of room, so we can move on to mounting and torquing the bracket down. You'll install the lock washer against the Toyota cast knuckle, and then you'll thread on the nut. When torquing these down, don't torque the Allen head. Instead, hold the Allen in place while you torque the nut from behind to the Toyota recommended specification, which is 77 foot-pounds. Next, we can install this super sinister-looking Wilwood rotor. Now, these are directional, so you'll want to take note of the arrow that's visible on the outside of the rotor and make sure you install it with that arrow pointing toward the front of the vehicle. Remember that bolt that we used to test fit the clearance on the knuckle? We're going to use that bolt now to mount the 4-piston calipers. Again, we're going to use the Toyota torque specification of 77 foot-pounds to secure the calipers to the bracket. Now we come to inserting the brake pads. This may or may not be tricky for you, and I'll tell you why. The Toyota casting on the hub isn't always precise, so you'll find variances from vehicle to vehicle or from side to side. If you find that inserting the brake pads is very difficult, here's what you're going to do next. With both brake pads inserted into the caliper, thread on a lug nut onto one of your wheel studs. Now take your torque wrench and set it to 50 foot-pounds. If the force required to move the rotor is greater than 50 foot-pounds, you'll need to bring the caliper a bit more outboard using the spacers that Andy provides in the kit. If you can turn it with less than 50 foot-pounds, then what you're feeling is the roughness of the pads against the black finish of the rotor, which will smooth out during the bed-in procedure. If you cannot insert both pads into the brake caliper, then that's a sign that you'll need to backtrack and install the spacers. You'll need to install these spacers between the Toyota mounting ear and the ARZ bracket, which is pictured here. Now, on my particular installation, my passenger side did not need the spacers, whereas my driver's side did. Once we installed the spacers, the brake pads slid in without a problem. Now we move on to threading the brake line fitting into the caliper using some Teflon tape. When installing this fitting into the caliper, be sure you don't obstruct the opening with the tape and don't tighten the heck out of it. These are flared fittings that are designed to seal after about half of the available threads are engaged. Once this is all threaded in, it's time to replace your old factory soft line with your new hard lines. This can be a bit tricky, but thankfully for you, you have those photos you took that you can refer back to. Reuse your factory clips to secure the lines in the factory positions. Once that's done, you'll want to run the steering from lock to make sure that nothing interferes with your lines. While you watch me struggle with the clips, I want to talk about the bleeding procedure, which you will need to do once you get everything buttoned up. These calipers are unique in that they have 2 channels per caliper, so when you bleed the system, you'll start on the passenger side at the inboard bleeder, and then you'll move to the outboard bleeder, and then repeat the whole process on the driver's side. Keep in mind, these are 1/4-inch bleeders and they do not need a lot of torque. Once you've bled the system and double-checked your work, make sure that your brake pedal feels nice and strong before you move a foot. If anything feels off, check the system for leaks. If it all feels good, then you're ready for the bed-in procedure, and I'll link that in the description below. And that wraps it up for the installation of the ARZ Wilwood front brake kit on the Mark III Supra. Now, I wanted to wait a few weeks to film this portion of the video because I wanted to drive the car a lot so I can give you my honest opinion of how the brakes perform. So 2 days after doing the installation, my wife and I hopped in the Supra and we drove down to Houston for a day for Texas 2K. I was utterly blown away with how well these brakes perform. It stops like a sports car now. I mean, it completely floored me. And the only upgrade I have done on the braking system on this car is the kit from ARZ. It is a fantastic kit, and if you're interested in it, I'll include a link down below in the description. I want to thank Andy over at ARZ for being amazing to collaborate with. It has been an absolute blast. If you guys have enjoyed this video or found it helpful at all, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. We would greatly appreciate it. Have a great day, and we'll catch you on the next video.